Chances are, if you're watching this video, you probably found my channel by watching my video about why I quit my dream job at Disney. So you might know that my dream ever since I was a kid was to be a Disney animator. I'm sure that's not too unusual of a dream to have. I'm sure that's been the experience of wide-eyed kids for decades. The experience of watching a really beautiful, crafted, animated film can be so profound and life-changing. You feel this ineffable magic, this aching and longing. You want to be able to grab a hold of it and be part of it. If you're anything like me, your first reaction might be to wish you could literally climb into the screen and be part of the world. But I think most of us eventually disabuse ourselves of the fantasy and start to redirect our passions toward the process. You start to discover that you can actually grow up and make animated movies, and that becomes the next best thing to owning a piece of that magic. You can become a creator. It's no surprise then, with all of us scrambling to live our dreams, that feature studios like Disney and Pixar are incredibly competitive to get a job at. I'll admit I applied a few times at each studio when I was younger and was definitely not qualified in any way. Probably still not really qualified. Eventually did land a gig at Disney Interactive, which was an amazing experience, but yeah, wasn't Disney feature. Everyone wants to work at a studio like Pixar or Disney, or maybe you're one of these people that fantasizes about working at Cartoon Network or for Marvel Comics or Blizzard Games. And maybe you've got the talent to actually make it. But I want to make the argument today that there may be a better option, that working for a big studio is not all it's cracked up to be, and that perhaps you can find greater artistic fulfillment outside of a big studio. I want you to consider becoming Bill Peet. When I was still in my teens, I had the luck of reading Bill Peet's autobiography, which if you have the chance, I highly recommend you pick it up. Even at that time, it was hard to find anything written about Disney that wasn't trying to paint an idealized, magical portrait of the studio. And Peet's autobiography, while not bitter, was an honest retelling of how Peet worked at the Disney studios, did some amazing work, but eventually left to pursue his own work. And I particularly love how he depicts Walt Disney. He just portrays him as a human and really demystifies this kind of bigger-than-life concept we have of him. Clearly, Disney and Peet had personalities that clashed, which played part in Peet's departure, but he shows what a showman Disney could be, his optimism, but also his pettiness. And Peet's example is something I've thought a lot about as I have pursued my own career. But I don't think I have really internalized how important his decision was until later in my life. And I wish I had understood that earlier. And he's really become a symbol to me of the power of artistic independence. So why would you want to take the path of Bill Peet? First of all, as Peet's autobiography recounts, making art in a studio can be full of tension and politics. This is something I've certainly experienced firsthand, but you can find plenty of books that demonstrate the infighting, politics, and ego of working in a large studio. And that can be no fun. But honestly, it isn't reason enough not to work at a big studio. Making art is always messy and grueling, whether you're doing it in a studio or alone, and the shit you have to go through is not reason enough to avoid the experience. It's actually a little bit there, like this line I heard from Guillermo del Toro. Once, many years ago, I was at Comic-Con in a session he was at, and he made this comment: "Making movies is like eating a sandwich full of shit. Sometimes there's a little more, sometimes there's a little less, but there's always shit." So that's just part of the job. You got to accept it. But the more important reason that you may want to consider artistic independence is you will have more of an artistic voice. So here's the reality. If you want to tell stories, if you have a vision, the doors of Pixar are pretty much closed to you. That's even if you get in and are actually working there. The doors to telling stories at Pixar are very close to you. They already have their stable of directors. They may have a new director every now and then, but chances are 80% of films coming out of Pixar will be directed by John Lasseter, Andrew Stanton, or Pete Docter, or one of their other kind of stable directors. And underneath that group of directors are hundreds of other veterans that have literally put in decades at those studios waiting for their chance to direct, to tell their story. So even if you get a job at Pixar, you'll not only be the last in line, but you'll have to compete for those coveted positions tooth and nail. The chances of you telling your story at Pixar is very close to zero. However, the chance of you telling your story, if you decided you wanted to make it happen on your own, is 100%. And that's what Bill Peet did. Even though he played a hand in creating some of the most memorable stories at Disney, he left and went on to tell his own stories. And some of my most beloved children's books from my childhood were written and illustrated by Bill Peet. I still have the image in my mind. The monster in Cowardly Clyde is so iconic to me. I just loved the design on that monster. And I remember being terrified when I was a kid, actually, there's the sun. The sun isn't even the bad guy. The sun is the reason the monster dies, but the sun was scarier to me than the monster. But I loved the monster in that book. So, of course, if you decide you want to create art independently, you may have to give up your big budget dreams. But honestly, I think we way overrate the impact of a big budget and underrate the power of the imagination. A simple story told elegantly and masterfully can have a deeper effect than $1 billion spectacle. And guess what? For however much I admire Bill Peet, he was really no different than Walt Disney. I mean, think about it. Clearly, Walt Disney's dream was not to work at Disney. He's a guy that had a vision and went out and started his own thing. The same applies to John Lasseter. John Lasseter, his dream actually was to work at Disney, and he got fired from Disney. So what did he do? So he went and found a place where he could tell his own stories, and that became Pixar. Of course, everyone is not going to have the same success as Walt Disney or John Lasseter. If you go out and choose to tell your story, that's probably not going to happen, that you're going to be able to start a big creative studio, although that's absolutely a possibility. But this is why this approach makes so much sense, is that could happen. That awesome upside could happen, that you become the next Disney. But the downside is that you become Bill Peet. And that's an awesome downside. I really like those options. Becoming the next Bill Peet is a downside I could be very, very happy with. Okay. After having said all this, I'm going to be honest. If I had a chance to work at Disney Feature, Pixar, or another big studio, I would do it in a heartbeat. Honestly, even though I decided to leave Disney Interactive to make my own work, I learned so much from the experience, and just having it on my resume opened so many doors. So there's still good reason to work for a big studio. You'll work with amazing artists, you will learn and grow, you'll perfect your craft, and you'll have a big fat Disney feature on your resume, which is way more powerful than you might realize. The key thing is to keep it in perspective. What's your end goal? For me, it would still be to tell my own stories. If working in a big studio can make me better at doing that and open doors, I'm all for it. The last thing to consider is that established institutions start to get kind of inefficient. So if you decide to start your own venture, you may actually have a strategic advantage. If you can get together some talented friends and really hustle and put some passion into it, you can make something breathtaking and probably for much cheaper than any big studio. And for however much I like what Pixar has produced, the truth is that it's only one voice, and we sorely need more artistic voices out there. There is a Pixar type of story that they will always be good at telling, just as there was a Disney type story before Pixar, but they will never know how to tell your story. Only you can do that. So don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the sanctified elders of art to anoint you or to receive your mouse ear shaped acceptance letter. Go out and prove yourself. Go out and tell the story you want to tell. Go be Bill Peet.